My name is Violet Murphy. I am 32 years old. 2 weeks after my grandmother Beatrice died, I sat in a downtown Atlanta law office and watched my parents steal half my inheritance. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just watched my older brother Liam smirk as the lawyer read the amended will, granting him 50% of the historic Savannah waterfront estate my grandmother and I had spent my entire life restoring. Liam is 35. He runs tech startups that fail every 2 years, and my father always bails him out. He had not visited our grandmother in a decade. But there he was sitting across from me claiming half of her legacy. My mother Patricia let out a long sigh of relief. My father Thomas adjusted his tie. They thought they had won. They thought the forged power of attorney they slipped past a notary while my grandmother was in her final days had worked. They thought I was just going to lower my head and accept it the way I had accepted being pushed to the edges of this family for 30 years. Out? Then the lawyer, Silas Montgomery, cleared his throat. He did not close his leather folder. Instead, he reached inside and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. He looked directly at my parents, then at Liam, and finally at me. "There is a second document," he said. The room went dead silent. My mother stopped breathing. My father leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table. "Read it," my father ordered. Silas shook his head. He slid the envelope across the table until it rested right in front of me. "I cannot do that," Silas said. "Beatrice left explicit instructions. This document is for Violet alone. No one else is permitted to see it." I looked down at my name written in my grandmother's steady, unmistakable handwriting. She knew exactly what they were going to do, and she had planned accordingly. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope and the trap my grandmother set from beyond the grave, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy stories about family secrets and ultimate payback. Have you ever watched the people who were supposed to protect you realize they have been caught in a lie? Drop a yes in the comments. Because the look on my mother's face when Silas handed me that envelope was worth more than any house. Let me take you back to that moment in the law office. The air conditioning was humming, but sweat was pooling on my father's forehead. My mother tried to laugh, a thin, nervous sound that echoed in the quiet room. "Silas," she said, her voice shaking just a fraction. "We are her parents. We are the executors of the estate. We have a right to know what Beatrice wrote." Silas folded his hands on the desk. "You are the executors of the trust outlined in the amended will, Patricia. You have zero legal authority over personal correspondence directed solely to another beneficiary. If you attempt to force your daughter to open it here, I will have you escorted out of my office." Liam slapped his hand on the table. He was used to getting his way. My parents had spent his entire life paving his road with cash and excuses. "Violet," he snapped. "Open it right now." Grandma was out of her mind at the end. "Who knows what she wrote? You need to show us." I looked at Liam. His face was flushed. The smirk was gone. The entitlement he wore like a second skin was cracking. I picked up the envelope. It felt heavy. The wax seal was cold against my thumb. For my entire life I had been the prop in their perfect Alpharetta family portrait. The quiet archivist daughter they only invited to Sunday dinners so I could listen to them brag about Liam. They thought I was weak. But holding that envelope, feeling the weight of my grandmother's final secret, I felt something shift inside me. "No," I said. My voice was calm, even. I stood up and put the envelope in my bag. "I am going home." My father stood up so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "You are not leaving this room until we read that letter, Violet. Do not test me." I met his stare. He was a man used to ruling his house through intimidation. But we were not in his house. Silas stood up behind his desk. "Thomas," Silas said, his tone dropping an octave, "I suggest you sit down." I turned and walked out the door. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but my steps were steady. I knew the war had just started, and I knew they had no idea what was coming. I drove away from Silas Montgomery's office with the wax-sealed envelope sitting on the passenger seat of my car. I did not tear it open right away. My hands were shaking too hard to steer, let alone break a seal. I pulled into a vacant parking lot, put the car in park, and just stared at my name written in my grandmother's looping cursive. To understand why that envelope felt like a loaded weapon, you have to understand the invisible war I grew up in. My parents live in a sprawling brick colonial in Alpharetta. 6 bedrooms, a manicured lawn, and a driveway filled with luxury cars. Every Sunday at 6 in the evening, attendance at their mahogany dining table was mandatory. It was never an invitation to bond. It was an audience summons. My brother Liam always sat to my father's right. Liam is 35 but operates with the frantic energy of a teenager who still gets a weekly allowance. That Sunday, just 2 months ago, Liam was pitching his latest venture, an app that used artificial intelligence to curate premium wine subscriptions. He had no coding experience, he had no inventory, he had a slideshow on his tablet and a confident smile. My father Thomas leaned back in his leather chair, swirling his bourbon. He nodded as if Liam had just cured a major disease. "That is disruptive, Liam," my father said. "That is exactly the kind of vision the market rewards." Before dessert was even served, my father was sliding a check across the table. Seed money, he called it. The 3rd round of seed money this year. I sat at the far end of the table near the kitchen doors. I work as an archive specialist for the Georgia Historical Society. I handle fragile documents, preserve local history, and make $42,000 a year. That afternoon, I had just secured a competitive state grant for our department. When I tried to mention it during the salad course, my mother Patricia interrupted me to ask the caterer for more butter. After dinner, I found my mother in the kitchen. I asked her a simple question. "Why does Dad write Liam a blank check for every wild idea, but you both refuse to co-sign the loan for my reliable used car?" My mother stopped drying a wine glass. She turned to me with a look of practiced, devastating pity. She reached out and touched my cheek. "Oh, Violet," she sighed. "You are just so independent. You have always been our strong girl. Liam actually needs us. He is a visionary, and visionaries need support. You do not want to be a burden on your family, do you?" That was her magic trick. She wrapped neglect in a compliment and handed it to me like a gift. She gaslit me into believing my self-sufficiency was the reason I deserved nothing. Have you ever had a toxic family member disguise their terrible behavior as praise? Drop a yes in the comments if you know exactly how that feels. It is a very specific type of psychological trap. The only person who saw right through the Alpharetta illusion was my grandmother Beatrice, my father's mother. Beatrice was sharp, unsentimental, and fiercely protective of the truth. She lived down the coast in Savannah in a stunning historic waterfront estate built in the early 1900s. While Liam spent his summers at sailing camps paid for by my parents, I spent mine in Savannah with Beatrice. We restored that house together. We sanded original pine floorboards. We polished antique brass hardware. We sat on the wraparound porch listening to the cicadas hum in the thick Georgia heat. I remember one evening late last summer. We were sitting on the porch swing. The smell of salt water and jasmine hung in the air. Beatrice was holding a glass of iced tea watching the river. Out of nowhere, she turned to me. Her eyes were pale blue and piercing. "Watch your father, Violet," she said quietly. I looked at her confused. "Watch him do what?" "Greed is a quiet disease," she told me. "It rots the foundation long before you see the floorboards cave in. Your father looks at this estate and sees a ledger. He sees equity. You look at this house and see a home. Do not let him convince you that you are worth less than your brother." I brushed it off at the time. My father was a successful executive. Why would he ever need anything from an 80-year-old woman's estate? I got the answer 3 weeks ago. The phone call came at 2 in the morning. A severe stroke. The paramedics had rushed Beatrice to the intensive care unit at the regional hospital. I threw clothes into an overnight bag, jumped into my car, and drove fast through the dark, praying the entire way. When I burst through the sliding doors of the ICU, my lungs were burning. I sprinted toward room 312, but I never made it inside. My parents were already there. They were not sitting by her bed holding her hand. They were not crying in the waiting area. They were standing shoulder to shoulder directly in front of the door, blocking the entrance like sentries. Mom. Dad. I gasped, reaching for the door handle. Is she awake? My father stepped into my path. He grabbed my upper arm. His grip was rigid, his fingers digging into my skin. The doctor said limited stimulation, Violet, he stated. His voice was flat, cold, businesslike. I tried to pull away. I just want to see her, I pleaded. Just for a minute. My mother stepped forward and put her hand on my chest, physically pushing me back into the hallway. She shook her head, putting on a mask of deep maternal concern. You will only stress her out, sweetheart, Patricia whispered. Her heart rate is too erratic. The medical team was very clear. Only the primary contacts can be in the room right now. Go get some coffee. We will come get you when she stabilizes. I believed them, because who lies outside a dying woman's door? I walked to the cafeteria. I bought a terrible cup of coffee. I sat in a plastic chair for 3 hours staring at a muted television screen. When I finally walked back upstairs, the room was empty. Beatrice was gone. It was not until today, sitting in Silas Montgomery's office, looking at the date stamped on that forged amended will, that the timeline finally clicked into place. The date of the amendment was the exact same day she was in the ICU. My parents did not block me from entering that room because of limited stimulation. They blocked me because there was someone else inside, a notary. While I was fetching coffee while I was weeping in a cafeteria chair, my father was holding a pen to my unconscious grandmother's hand, guiding her fingers to sign away the Savannah estate to Liam. They were not protecting a dying woman. They were robbing her. I sat in my car in this vacant parking lot, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The sheer scale of their betrayal was suffocating. My father stole my inheritance, and my mother stood guard at the door. I looked down at the wax-sealed envelope on the passenger seat. Beatrice had warned me. Watch your father. Before I could break the seal, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text message from Liam. I picked it up. The screen lit up with his name. I am taking the master suite in Savannah, the message read. I am having contractors look at the place tomorrow to modernize the kitchen. Stay out of my way, Violet. I own half this property now, and I will not deal with your emotional drama. I stared at the glowing words. My brother, who had not called Beatrice on her birthday in 10 years, was already bringing in contractors to rip apart the historic kitchen she and I had painstakingly preserved. He was claiming his stolen prize before the ink was even dry on the probate papers. He thought I was going to stay out of his way. I put the car in drive, pulled out of the parking lot, and merged onto Interstate 16, heading south toward the coast. I was not going to let him touch one single brick of that house. But I had no idea that my parents had already anticipated my reaction. I had no idea that while I was sitting in the lawyer's office, they had already made their next move. The drive down Interstate 16 from Atlanta to Savannah takes roughly 4 hours. I made it in 3.5. The landscape outside my car window shifted from concrete overpasses to endless stretches of tall Georgia pines, and finally to the flat coastal plains, heavy with humidity. For the entire drive, my phone sat in the passenger seat, the screen dark, but Liam's text message burned in my mind. I am taking the master suite. Having contractors look at the place tomorrow. Stay out of my way. He wanted the master suite. The arrogance of that demand was suffocating. The master suite of the Savannah estate featured hand-carved crown molding from the late 1800s and a restored fireplace we spent an entire summer polishing by hand. Liam did not know the history of the architecture. He did not care about the craftsmanship. He only saw a large room he could gut and replace with something modern, sterile, and soulless. He viewed our grandmother's legacy as a flip project. I turned off the highway and navigated the narrow oak-lined streets of the historic district. Spanish moss hung from the branches like gray lace brushing the roof of my car as I turned onto the private gravel driveway. The tires crunched over crushed oyster shells. I parked near the ancient stone fountain my grandmother and I used to clean every spring. The estate stood tall against the late afternoon sun. It was a stunning 3-story Victorian, wrapped in wide porches and framed by mature magnolias. It was breathtaking. And according to the forged document filed in probate court, Half of it belonged to a man who wanted to tear its heart out. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, slinging the strap over my shoulder. The Georgia heat wrapped around me the second I opened the car door, thick and heavy with the scent of salt marsh and blooming jasmine. I walked up the brick pathway to the front steps. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy iron key my grandmother had given me 5 years ago. I climbed the wooden stairs. The familiar creak of the third step greeted me. I walked up to the heavy antique mahogany front door, slid my iron key toward the keyhole, and stopped. The lock was different. The original tarnished iron plate was gone. In its place was a shiny, cheap brass deadbolt. It looked absurd against the dark, historic wood. I stared at the metal, my brain trying to process what I was looking at. I pushed my iron key against the slot, but it did not even fit. I took a step back. I looked at the doorknob, also replaced. My parents had not just orchestrated a fake will, they had coordinated a physical lockout. My father must have called a local Savannah locksmith days ago, scheduling the hardware change to happen the very second the legal paperwork was filed in Atlanta. They knew I would drive straight here. They wanted me to arrive, find myself locked out, and feel powerless. They wanted me standing on the porch in the sweltering heat, realizing that Liam owned the property, and I was nothing but a trespasser. A cold wave of anger washed over me, chilling the humid air. They thought a piece of cheap brass would stop me. I retreated from the door and walked over to the porch swing at the far end of the veranda. I sat down on the painted wood. My hands were steady now. The shock had burned off during the drive, leaving behind a sharp, focused clarity. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick envelope Silas Montgomery had handed me. I ran my thumb over the red wax seal. It bore the crest of a local stationery shop Beatrice loved. I broke the wax. The dry snap echoed in the quiet afternoon. I tilted the envelope. A tiny, heavy brass key slid out and dropped into the palm of my hand. It was not a door key. It was small, intricately cut, the kind of key used for a diary or a secure lockbox. I closed my fingers around it and reached back into the envelope. I pulled out a single sheet of heavy cream cardstock. The ink was dark navy. The handwriting was elegant looping and undeniably hers. I read the words, and for the first time since she passed away, I heard my grandmother's voice echoing clearly in my mind. My dearest Violet, if you are reading this, your father used the forged power of attorney just as I suspected. I stopped breathing. I read the sentence again. She knew. She knew exactly what my father was capable of, and she knew he had falsified the legal authority over her life. I forced my eyes to the next line. Do not panic. They think they won the house. They think they hold all the cards. They do not know about the ledger. Use the trellis on the east wall. Go to the library floorboards. Find the truth. I love you, my brave girl. I lowered the letter to my lap. A strange, powerful sense of relief washed over me. I was not crazy. I had not imagined the malice in my parents' actions. Beatrice had seen it too, and rather than confront a son who would simply deny it, she had spent her final months building a trap. Some families give you love. Mine gave me a crime scene to solve. Have you ever had to play detective in your own family? Have you ever had to search for evidence just to prove the people raising you were lying? Let me know in the comments. Because sitting on that porch holding a tiny brass key and a set of instructions from a dead woman, I realized I was no longer an archivist organizing history. I was an investigator unearthing a current active fraud. I folded the heavy cardstock and slipped it into my pocket alongside the tiny key. I stood up from the porch swing and walked down the steps, heading toward the east side of the estate. The east wall of the house faced the river. It was shaded by a massive weeping willow shielding it from the street and the neighboring properties. Climbing up the side of the brick exterior was an old wrought iron trellis. My grandmother had planted Confederate jasmine at its base 20 years ago, and the vines had woven themselves thick and tight through the metal scrollwork, creating a sturdy, fragrant ladder that reached all the way to the second-floor balcony. The balcony belonged to the library. I looked up. The climb was steep. The iron was old, but my father had changed the locks on the ground floor, assuming I would behave like the quiet, compliant daughter they raised me to be. He assumed I would cry, get back in my car, and drive back to my tiny apartment in Atlanta in defeat. He forgot that I spent every summer in this house. He forgot that I knew every hidden corner, every loose brick, and every rusted latch. I kicked off my flats and tossed them into the grass. I grabbed the lowest rung of the wrought iron trellis. The metal was rough against my palms. I hoisted my weight up, wedging my bare foot into the intersection of the ironwork. The jasmine vines rustled, releasing a sweet, heavy perfume into the air. I climbed. My muscles burned, but the adrenaline masked the strain. I pulled myself higher, inch by inch, scaling the side of the Victorian estate. The wind off the river whipped my hair across my face. I reached the midway point, my hands gripping the rusted metal, my feet finding purchase among the thick green vines. Just one more push. I reached up and grabbed the ornate iron railing of the second-floor balcony. I hauled myself over the top, swinging my legs over the banister, and landed quietly on the wooden deck. I stood up and dusted the bark and rust from my clothes. I turned to face the French doors leading into the library. The glass panes were dark. The house inside was dead silent. I reached for the brass handle. It was locked, but the library doors possessed a faulty internal latch my grandmother had refused to fix because she liked the draft it let in during the summer. I slipped my driver's license out of my pocket, wedged the plastic edge into the doorframe, and shimmied it downward against the old mechanism. With a sharp click, the latch gave way. I pushed the French doors open and stepped into the stifling heat of the closed-up house. I was standing in my grandmother's library. The room smelled of old paper, leather bindings, and lemon wood polish. The curtains were drawn, casting the room in heavy shadows. I walked toward the center of the room, looking down at the antique Persian rug. Beneath it lay the original heart pine floorboards. They think they won the house, the letter had said. They do not know about the ledger. I dropped to my knees and rolled back the edge of the heavy rug, ready to find whatever secret my grandmother had hidden in the dark. The floorboards beneath the antique Persian rug were original heart pine laid down over a century ago. I ran my fingertips along the seams, pressing the wood, searching for any sign of a hollow space. The library was suffocatingly warm. The air conditioning had been shut off, and the late afternoon sun was baking the brick exterior. Sweat stung my eyes, but I kept working my hands across the grain. Near the marble fireplace, the wood shifted. Just a fraction of an inch, but it was enough. I dug my fingernails into the narrow gap between two boards and pulled upward. The plank lifted with a soft groan, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity cut directly into the floor joists. I reached inside the dusty space. My hand brushed against something smooth and cool. I pulled it out and sat back on my heels. It was a vintage leather-bound ledger. The cover was thick, dyed a deep oxblood red, and secured with a small brass lock on the side. I reached into my pocket, my fingers trembling slightly as I retrieved the tiny brass key I had found inside the wax-sealed envelope. I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The mechanism clicked open. I expected to find a diary. I thought I would be reading my grandmother's private thoughts, her fears, maybe her final wishes. I opened the heavy cover and realized how vastly I had underestimated Beatrice Murphy. It was not a diary. It was a forensic accounting record. The pages were filled with columns drawn in black ink. Dates, bank routing numbers, wire transfer confirmation codes, and exact dollar amounts. Beatrice had not just suspected my parents of stealing. She had been tracking them for 8 years. I traced my finger down the first page. October 12th, 6 years ago. An unauthorized withdrawal of $40,000 from her secondary investment account. Beside the amount, Beatrice had written a single note. Thomas covered his margin call on the tech stock failure. I flipped the page. June 3rd, 4 years ago. A direct wire of $25,000. The note beside it read, Patricia requested a bridge loan for the country club expansion. Never repaid. Falsified the return date. Page after page, the ledger documented a systematic, relentless bleeding of her assets. They treated her life savings like a personal slush fund. My father funneled cash to cover his bad investments, and my mother skimmed thousands to maintain her flawless Alpharetta socialite facade. Beatrice had documented every single stolen dime, creating a flawless paper trail of their financial crimes. But the money was not the most dangerous thing in that book. Tucked into a hidden pocket inside the back cover was a folded piece of official hospital stationery. I pulled it out and smoothed it flat on the floor. It was a medical evaluation from the Atlanta Neurological Institute. The letterhead belonged to Dr. Eris Thorne, one of the top cognitive specialists in the state. I looked at the date at the top of the page. It was dated exactly 7 days before my grandmother suffered her stroke. The report detailed a comprehensive neurological exam. The conclusion was typed in bold ink at the bottom of the page. The patient exhibits pristine cognitive function, exceptional memory retention, and full capacity to manage all personal, medical, and financial affairs. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. This single sheet of paper was a silver bullet. When my father forced that forged amended will through probate, he relied on a specific legal strategy. He claimed Beatrice had been suffering from rapid onset dementia for months. He told the court she was confused, vulnerable, and needed him to step in as her legal power of attorney to protect her assets. He used that fake medical narrative to justify signing her name while she lay dying in the ICU. This evaluation proved the dementia was a complete fabrication. Beatrice secured this medical clearance a week before her stroke because she knew exactly what my father was planning. She built a wall of undeniable evidence to protect her legacy, and she left it right here for me to find. I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever uncovered a truth so damaging it could permanently destroy the people who raised you? Tell me in the comments how you handled it. Because sitting on that library floor holding a document that proved my father committed felony fraud, I did not feel victorious. I felt a cold, sharp dread settling in my stomach. I was holding the key to a federal prison sentence. Before I could even process my next move, a bright beam of halogen light sliced through the gaps in the drawn curtains. The light swept across the library wall, illuminating the dust motes hanging in the stagnant air. A heavy vehicle was rolling up the gravel driveway. The crunching of oyster shells echoed loudly through the silent property. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the ledger to my chest. I crept over to the tall windows, staying flat against the wall, and peeked through the edge of the heavy velvet drapes. Down below, Liam's pristine white Range Rover shifted into park next to the old stone fountain. The driver's side door opened, and my brother stepped out into the humid evening air. He was wearing tailored slacks and a linen shirt, looking every bit the affluent owner of a historic southern estate. The passenger door opened and his wife Jessica stepped out. Jessica was the runner-up for Miss Georgia a decade ago, a title she treated like an active military rank. She was the exact mirror image of my mother. Status-obsessed, deeply entitled, and currently swatting at gnats with a designer handbag. She looked up at the Victorian house, her face twisting in distaste, pointing at the peeling paint on the veranda. She was already planning the demolition. I backed away from the window, my pulse drumming a frantic rhythm against my throat. I needed to leave. I needed to get down the trellis run to my car and drive straight to Silas Montgomery's office with the ledger. But then a second set of headlights turned onto the gravel driveway. I froze. I pressed my face back to the edge of the curtain. A white Savannah Police Department cruiser rolled to a stop right behind Liam's SUV. The red and blue light bar on the roof was dark, but the arrival was unmistakable. Liam had not just come to measure the kitchen for his renovation. He had brought law enforcement. He knew the property was legally contested and he wanted a police presence to secure his new asset just in case a squatter or an unwanted sister decided to show up. I watched Liam walk over to the patrol car and shake hands with the 2 officers who stepped out. He pointed at the house, speaking with that smooth, unearned authority my father taught him. The officers nodded, adjusting their utility belts. They were walking toward the front steps. I was trapped. I could not go out the French doors and climb down the trellis. The police were standing right in the front yard. They would see me scaling down the side of the house like a burglar. I would be arrested for breaking and entering before my feet even touched the grass. Downstairs, the sound of a key sliding into the new brass deadbolt echoed up the central staircase. The lock turned with a heavy clack. The heavy mahogany front door pushed open the hinges, whining in the quiet house. "Hello," Liam's voice boomed from the foyer, echoing up the stairwell. Anyone in here? I backed away from the window, my breath catching in my chest. The floorboards beneath my feet felt like a trap door. I looked around the shadowed library. There was nowhere to hide, no secondary exit. Heavy boots stepped onto the hardwood floor downstairs. I heard the crackle of a police radio slicing through the silence. "Clear the ground floor first," one of the officers said. I stood near the fireplace, clutching the leather ledger with both hands. My brother was downstairs with the police acting like the rightful king of the castle, and I was cornered on the second floor, holding the one piece of evidence that would prove he was a thief. The heavy footsteps moved past the parlor and started walking toward the bottom of the main staircase. The heavy tread of boots echoed on the wooden stairs, vibrating through the floorboards beneath my feet. I stood frozen in the shadowed library. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my hands were steady. I slid the thick leather ledger and the medical evaluation into my canvas tote bag, zipping it shut. I did not try to hide. Hiding is what guilty people do. I simply stood by the marble fireplace and waited. The footsteps reached the second-floor landing. I heard Jessica complaining about the humidity, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. Then came Liam's voice, loud and dripping with unearned authority. "Check the master suite first, officers," my brother instructed. "I want to make sure the perimeter is secure before my contractors arrive tomorrow morning." The library door handle rattled. I had not locked it from the inside, but the old wood often swelled in the Georgia heat, causing the frame to stick. Liam did not turn the knob gently. He shoved his shoulder against the painted wood, kicking the bottom panel with the heel of his loafer. The door burst open, slamming against the interior wall with a crack like a gunshot. Liam stepped into the room, reaching for the wall switch. The antique chandelier flared to life, flooding the library with harsh, sudden light. He saw me instantly. For a fraction of a second, his face registered pure shock. Then the shock warped into a sneer of absolute victory. He turned over his shoulder, gesturing wildly to the two uniformed Savannah police officers standing in the hallway. "Officers, get in here," Liam shouted. "Arrest her! She broke into my house." The two policemen stepped into the room, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Jessica hovered in the doorway behind them, her manicured hand flying to her mouth in exaggerated horror. "What are you doing here?" Violet, Liam demanded, taking a step toward me. His face was flushed. He pointed a finger at my chest, his voice rising in pitch. "Officers, this is my unstable sister. She has a history of erratic behavior. She is trespassing on my private property. I want her removed in handcuffs right now." It was a masterful performance. He was channeling our mother flawlessly, using the exact same smear tactics Patricia had perfected in Alpharetta. Paint the target as crazy, strip away their credibility before they can even speak. If I had screamed, if I had cried, if I had raised my voice to defend myself, I would have played right into his trap. The police would have seen a hysterical intruder. But I am an archivist. My entire career is built on organizing facts, preserving fragile truths, and bringing order to chaos. I do not deal in hysterics. I deal in documentation. I looked at the two officers. I did not take a step back. I kept my posture straight, and my voice conversational. "Good evening, officers," I said. "My name is Violet Murphy. I am a legal owner of this estate. My brother is having a temper tantrum." Liam let out a sound of pure outrage. "She is lying. I own this property. My grandmother left it to me." She broke in through the balcony. I reached into my canvas tote bag. The officers tensed slightly, but I moved slowly, making sure they could see my empty hands. I pulled out my Georgia driver's license and a crisp, folded piece of thick legal paper. It was the official letter from Silas Montgomery, stamped and notarized, confirming my status as a 50% beneficiary of the Beatrice Murphy Trust. I held the documents out to the older of the two officers. "If you review this letter from the estate attorney," I explained calmly, "you will see that the property is currently held in equal shares. My brother holds half. I hold half. He changed the locks this morning without my consent, which is why I entered through the balcony doors. I am standing inside my own house." The older officer took my license and the letter. He unfolded the thick paper, holding it up to the light of the chandelier. The room was dead quiet save for the hum of the cicadas outside the open French doors. Liam was breathing heavily, his hands planted on his hips, waiting for the police to slap the cuffs on my wrists. Jessica peeked out from behind the younger officer. "Look at her shoes," Jessica whispered loudly, pointing at my bare feet. "She looks deranged." "Take her to jail, Liam." The older officer finished reading the letter. He handed it back to me along with my ID. He let out a long, tired sigh, the kind of sigh emitted by a public servant who realizes he has been dragged into a rich family dispute. He turned to my brother. "Sir," the officer said, his tone entirely devoid of the respect Liam demanded. "This paperwork is valid. Your sister is a legal 50% owner of this parcel." Liam blinked, his jaw dropped. "What are you talking about? I called you here to arrest a trespasser. She cannot trespass in her own house," the younger officer chimed in, sounding profoundly bored. "This is a civil matter, sir. We cannot remove her. If you two have a dispute over the deed, you need to call a mediator, not 911. "But she broke in," Liam sputtered, his voice cracking. "You changed the locks on a co-owner," the older officer countered. "Technically, that is an illegal eviction tactic. I suggest you give her a key. We are leaving. Have a good night, folks." The two officers turned on their heels and walked out of the library, their heavy boots echoing down the stairs. The front door clicked shut a minute later. The silence left in their wake was heavy. Jessica stood in the doorway, her face pale. She was obsessed with appearances, and she had just watched her husband get reprimanded like a toddler by local law enforcement. Liam glared at me. The smug entitlement had vanished, replaced by a cold, venomous glare. He stepped closer, dropping the performative victim act. "You think you are clever, Violet," he sneered. "You think waving a piece of paper around makes you safe. I am going to make your life a living hell. I am bringing demolition crews in here tomorrow at dawn. I am going to rip out these floors. I am going to tear down the walls. I am going to turn this dusty museum into a construction zone until you are so miserable you beg me to buy out your half." He expected me to flinch. He expected me to cry over the threat to our grandmother's legacy. He had spent his whole life watching our father bully people into submission, and he thought he had inherited the same power. I looked at my brother. I did not see a golden child anymore. I saw a hollow, arrogant man standing on a trapdoor he did not even know existed. I pulled the strap of my canvas bag higher on my shoulder, feeling the solid weight of the vintage ledger pressing against my side. I smiled. It was a small, sharp smile. "You really do not want a war with me, Liam," I whispered. I walked right past him. I did not look at Jessica as I moved through the doorway and descended the main staircase. I walked out the front door, slipping my bare feet into the flats I had left on the grass, and got into my car. The drive back to Atlanta felt different. The fear was gone. The shock of the betrayal had crystallized into cold, tactical determination. My family had declared war on me, but they had armed me with the weapons. I spent the 3-hour drive running through the numbers I had briefly seen in that ledger. The forged medical evaluations, the fake loans, the unauthorized wire transfers. My father was a corporate executive. He knew how to hide money. He knew how to build firewalls. If I marched into a police station with that ledger, a clever defense lawyer could tie it up in probate court for years, claiming Beatrice was just keeping messy notes. I needed more than just a ledger. I needed the actual bank records. I needed someone who knew where my father had buried the stolen funds. I needed an ally. Someone who understood high-stakes wealth-hidden assets and the ruthless rules of the tax bracket my parents operated within. When I finally reached my apartment in Atlanta, it was past midnight. The city was quiet. I sat at my kitchen table, turned on the overhead light, and opened the ledger. I flipped past the pages of stolen money looking for a clue. Beatrice had documented everything for a reason. She would not have left a puzzle without a key. On the very last page, tucked into the bottom corner in tiny, precise handwriting, was a name and a phone number. Evelyn Reed, Private Wealth Management. I stared at the name. Evelyn Reed was not my father's banker. My parents used a large impersonal firm in Alpharetta. This was someone else. This was a financial shark Beatrice had hired in secret. Have you ever found the perfect piece of leverage at the exact right moment? Drop a fire emoji in the comments if you know that feeling of pieces falling into place. It was 1 in the morning. A normal person would have waited until typical business hours to make the call. But we were no longer operating under normal rules. My brother was planning to bring sledgehammers into a historic property in 6 hours. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number. It rang twice. A woman answered. Her voice was crisp awake and sharper than shattered glass. Violet Evelyn Reed said, "I have been waiting for your call. Bring the ledger to Buckhead tomorrow morning. It is time to trigger the poison pill." I pulled into the parking lot of a sleek Buckhead coffee shop just as the sun was rising over the Atlanta skyline. I had not slept a single minute. My clothes were still wrinkled from the drive, and my hands smelled faintly of rust from climbing the wrought iron trellis. But my mind was wide awake. I walked through the glass doors of the cafe holding my canvas tote bag tight against my side. Evelyn Reed was already waiting at a corner booth. I knew Evelyn by reputation from a few passing comments my grandmother made years ago, but seeing her in person recalibrated my entire understanding of the situation. Evelyn was in her late 60s. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, a crisp silk blouse, and a silver watch that likely cost more than my annual salary. Her gray hair was cut into a sharp, exacting bob. She did not look like a friendly neighborhood accountant. She looked like a financial shark. She was the kind of woman who dismantled corporate portfolios before she finished her morning coffee. She did not stand up to greet me. She did not offer a sympathetic smile or platitudes about my recent loss. She simply pointed to the empty leather seat across from her and pushed a cup of black espresso across the marble table. "Sit down, Violet," she instructed. "Your grandmother told me you would find me when the time was right. I am glad you are safe. Now show me what you recovered." I unzipped my canvas bag and pulled out the vintage red ledger. I placed it onto the table between us. Evelyn reached out and let her manicured fingertips trace the edge of the leather binding. A slow, grim smile spread across her face. It was a terrifying smile. It held no joy, only the cold anticipation of a trap springing shut. I opened the ledger and pulled out the medical evaluation from the neurologist. She secured a clean bill of cognitive health a week before the stroke, I explained, keeping my voice low. And the pages inside detail every single unauthorized wire transfer my father made over the last 8 years. He stole from her, Evelyn. He used a fake power of attorney to change the will while she was in a coma to give Liam half the Savannah property. Evelyn picked up the medical report, scanned the doctor's signature, and nodded. "Thomas is a predictable man," she said, taking a sip of her espresso. "He treats greed like a virtue." Beatrice knew he would forge the probate documents the second her heart stopped. She knew he would try to erase you. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "So we take this to the police," I said. "We hand the ledger to a prosecutor and we charge them with fraud." Evelyn set her cup down. The ceramic clinked sharply against the saucer. "The ledger is for the criminal case, Violet. That will put your father behind bars." But Beatrice did not just want to send him to jail. She wanted to dismantle the kingdom he built with her money. She wanted him ruined. Evelyn reached into her designer briefcase and extracted a manila folder. She flipped it open, revealing a stack of complex banking documents stamped with international seals. "Criminal cases move slowly," Evelyn continued. "Defense attorneys can delay hearings for years. Your grandmother did not want to wait years. That is why we set up the poison pill." I stared at the financial documents. "What is a poison pill?" "It is a corporate defense strategy used to discourage a hostile takeover," Evelyn explained. "You make the target company so financially toxic that the buyer chokes on it." Beatrice applied the same logic to her own estate. Evelyn leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a quiet, lethal whisper. 6 months before she passed away, Beatrice instructed me to legally restructure the Savannah property. We went to a private commercial lender. We took out a mortgage against the equity of the historic estate, a very large, very binding commercial note. How much, I asked, my heart skipping a beat. $2.5 million, Evelyn answered smoothly. I felt the blood drain from my face. My grandmother owned that house free and clear for decades. Taking on a multi-million-dollar debt at 80 years old made zero financial sense. Where did the money go? I asked. It went far away from Georgia, Evelyn replied. We took that $2.5 million in cash and transferred it into an irrevocable offshore trust based in the Cayman Islands. A trust that your father cannot locate, cannot freeze, and cannot litigate. And Beatrice named only one living beneficiary to control that offshore account, you. I sat back in my chair. The bustling noise of the Buckhead coffee shop seemed to fade into static. My brain raced to catch up with the sheer, unmatched brilliance of my grandmother's final maneuver. Do you see the trap? Violet Evelyn asked, her eyes glittering with dark amusement. The commercial loan is attached to the deed of the Savannah estate. Whoever claims the deed automatically claims the liability. I thought about Liam standing in the foyer just hours ago. I thought about the smug, entitled look on his face as he claimed his inheritance. I thought about my father sitting in the lawyer's office exhaling in relief when he thought his forged will had held up. By forcing his name onto the deed, I whispered, realizing the magnitude of what they had done. My father did not just give Liam half a house. He gave him half of a $2.5 million debt, Evelyn confirmed. Liam inherited $1.25 million in immediate unforgiving liabilities. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. Liam was broke. His tech startups generated zero actual revenue. His lifestyle was funded entirely by his wife's credit cards and my father's handouts. He did not have $1 million. He probably did not have $10,000 in liquid cash. There is a final kicker, Evelyn added, tapping her manicured fingernail against the loan document. Commercial real estate notes often contain a due on transfer clause. When Liam filed that forged deed to claim ownership, he triggered the clause. The lender has been notified of the ownership change. What does that mean? I asked. It means the bank is not asking for monthly installments, Evelyn said. They are accelerating the loan. The entire balance is due in 30 days. A balloon payment. I stared at Evelyn, my mind visualizing the impending wreckage. Liam cannot pay that. He will default. Exactly, Evelyn agreed. And when a borrower defaults on a commercial note of this size, the bank does not just foreclose on the Savannah house. They go after the borrower's other assets to make themselves whole. Liam has no assets. But your father underwrites every single one of Liam's failed ventures. Thomas is listed as a guarantor on almost all of Liam's financial accounts. The liability will cross over. When Liam defaults, the bank will target his financial backer. They will go after my parents, I said, the reality solidifying in my mind. The bank will place liens on the Alpharetta estate, Evelyn stated calmly. They will freeze your father's investment portfolios. They will seize his luxury cars. Your family was so desperate to steal your birthright, they eagerly signed up for their own bankruptcy. They swallowed the poison pill without even chewing. I looked down at the table. For 30 years, my parents made me feel like an outsider because I did not care about their wealth or their status. They treated me like a naive, fragile archivist who could be easily pushed aside. They thought Beatrice was just a quiet old woman losing her memory. They say greed makes you blind. I never truly understood that phrase until this exact moment. My father and my brother were so blinded by their desire to take everything from me that they did not bother to check if the prize was rigged with explosives. Have you ever witnessed someone dig their own grave while trying to bury someone else? Type the word karma in the comments if you love a flawless, brilliant trap. Because realizing that my family was about to lose everything they valued was the most satisfying moment of my life. Evelyn closed the manila folder and slid it into her briefcase. The bank notices were mailed out yesterday, she said, picking up her espresso. They should arrive in Alpharetta by this afternoon. I looked out the window of the coffee shop. The Atlanta traffic was thickening. People were heading to work, drinking their coffee, living normal lives. Meanwhile, a financial bomb was making its way through the postal service, heading straight for my parents' pristine mailbox. I thanked Evelyn, picked up the red leather ledger, and walked out to my car. The Georgia morning was already growing hot. I knew my phone was going to start ringing very soon. I knew the screaming would start the second my father opened his mail. I put my keys in the ignition and smiled. Let them scream. The war had officially arrived at their front door. It took exactly 48 hours for the certified mail to reach the Alpharetta estate. The trap Evelyn Reed and my grandmother built had a very specific delivery mechanism. I was sitting at my desk at the Historical Society on a Thursday afternoon when my phone screen illuminated. It did not just ring, it erupted. There were 12 missed calls from my father, 15 from my brother. A relentless stream of text messages flooded my notifications. The tone of the messages shifted minute by minute. The first text from Liam demanded I pick up the phone. The second threatened to sue me for harassment. The third was a frantic plea asking what kind of offshore trust I had set up. The final text from my father simply read, "You have made a terrible mistake, Violet." They had received the acceleration notices from the commercial lender. The bank officially invoked the due on transfer clause. My brother had 30 days to produce $1.25 million, or the bank would initiate asset seizure protocols targeting my father as the financial guarantor. The fortress of wealth they used to intimidate me for 3 decades was suddenly a liability they could not escape. But narcissists do not surrender when they are cornered. They change the battlefield. If my father was the architect of our family financial crimes, my mother Patricia was the general of its psychological warfare. By Friday morning, she launched a counteroffensive designed to break me before I could ever reach a courtroom. If she could not beat me legally, she decided to destroy me socially. I woke up to a dozen messages from distant relatives and former high school friends I had not spoken to in years. They were sending me screenshots. I opened the social media application and saw a post my mother had published to her 500 affluent country club connections. It was a masterpiece of performative grief. She had attached a photo of herself holding my grandmother's hand in a hospital bed, a photo taken during the exact same hour my father was forging the power of attorney. Beneath the photo was a long, tearful status update. My mother wrote that her heart was broken. She claimed that the tragedy of losing Beatrice was being overshadowed by the cruelty of her own daughter. She told her audience that I was harboring deep jealousy toward my brother. She explicitly stated that I had manipulated a vulnerable woman with severe dementia during her final months, tricking her into restructuring her estate to bankrupt Liam out of spite. She ended the post by asking her friends for prayers, as their family endured this unthinkable elder abuse. Elder abuse! The sheer audacity of the projection was breathtaking. She accused me of the exact crime she and my father had just committed. Have you ever been the victim of an organized smear campaign? Drop a heart in the comments if you know how isolating it feels when the people you share DNA with try to publicly destroy your character. It is a very specific type of suffocating isolation. You want to scream. You want to post every piece of evidence you have to clear your name. The fallout was not confined to the digital world. My mother plays tennis with women who sit on the board of directors for local charities and museums. They thrive on scandal, and they weaponize pity. The Whisper network moved fast. By Monday morning, the gossip bled directly into my professional life. I walked into the Georgia Historical Society carrying a box of archived architectural blueprints. The reading room was unusually quiet. 2 of my colleagues stopped talking the second I walked past their desks. A few minutes later, the director of the society, Calvin Pierce, called me into his glass-walled office. Calvin is a pragmatic, careful man who treats the institution's public image like a fragile artifact. He asked me to close the door and take a seat. He looked deeply uncomfortable. "Violet." He began, his voice low and tight. "We received 3 anonymous phone calls to the administrative desk this morning. The callers expressed severe concerns about your ethics. They referenced an ongoing legal dispute regarding the exploitation of an elderly relative." I sat rigid in my chair. I knew exactly who made those calls. Patricia was trying to threaten my livelihood, squeezing my primary source of income, so I would be forced to drop the estate claim. Calvin held up a hand before I could defend myself. "I know family disputes get ugly," he said gently, "and your work here has always been exemplary, but we rely on wealthy donors to keep this society operational." Several of the names associated with these rumors are major benefactors. I am placing you on paid administrative leave for 2 weeks until this noise dies down. I walked out of the building an hour later, carrying a cardboard box of my personal desk items. The humid Atlanta air hit my face like a wet towel. I unlocked my car, sat in the driver's seat, and let the quiet of the vehicle wash over me. The weight of the isolation was crushing. I was locked out of my grandmother's house. I was suspended from a job I loved. I was being painted as a criminal by the woman who gave birth to me. My family had spent my entire life starving me of affection, and now they were actively trying to ruin my reputation. I pulled out my phone. The social media application was still open. My mother's post had over 200 comments. People were offering her sympathy, calling me greedy, suggesting I needed psychiatric help. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I had the neurologist report. I had the ledger. I could take a photograph of the forged transfers and upload it right there in the comments section. I could burn her social standing to ash in 5 seconds. But then I remembered sitting on the Savannah porch with Beatrice. I remembered her quiet, focused discipline. She did not argue with my father. She did not throw tantrums. She built an airtight vault of evidence and waited for the right moment to turn the key. Arguing with a narcissist in a public forum is like wrestling in the mud. You both get dirty, but the narcissist enjoys it. I locked my phone and tossed it into the passenger seat. I was not going to fight my mother on the internet. I was going to strip them of everything they owned in a federal courtroom. I started the engine and drove directly to downtown Atlanta. Silas Montgomery's law office was located on the 20th floor of a glass high-rise. I did not have an appointment, but when the receptionist saw the look on my face, she escorted me straight back to his suite. Silas was reviewing a contract when I walked in. I set my canvas tote bag on his polished mahogany desk. I unzipped the top and pulled out the thick red leather ledger. I placed the neurologist report right next to it, followed by the offshore trust documents Evelyn Reed had provided. "What is all this?" Violet Silas asked, putting down his pen. "This is the crime scene," I told him. Silas opened the ledger. He spent the next 45 minutes reading in absolute silence. The only sound in the room was the crisp turn of the thick vintage pages. As he read through the itemized list of my father's unauthorized wire transfers and my mother's fake bridge loans, the seasoned attorney's posture changed. The professional detachment vanished, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. When he reached the neurologist evaluation proving Beatrice was of sound mind, Silas closed the book. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "Your grandmother was keeping a shadow accounting book for 8 years, he said, his voice laced with awe. She documented every stolen dollar. Violet, this is not just a civil probate dispute anymore. These are federal wire fraud violations. If your father used a fraudulent power of attorney to execute these transfers, he is facing serious criminal exposure." "My mother just launched a public smear campaign claiming I abused Beatrice," I told him. "She called the Historical Society and got me suspended from my job. They are trying to starve me out, so I will hand over the Savannah deed and absorb the bank debt." Silas leaned back in his leather chair. He tapped his fingers against the cover of the red ledger. "They are attacking your reputation because they think their financial secrets are buried. But a handwritten ledger, even one this meticulous, is only a map. If we want to detonate this in front of a judge, we cannot just show them the map. We have to dig up the bodies." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "How do we do that?" "We initiate a forensic audit," Silas explained. "We take the routing numbers your grandmother recorded in this book and we subpoena the corresponding bank records. We track every single dollar Thomas drained from her accounts. We find out exactly where the stolen money went. Once we have the official bank receipts, your mother's internet gossip will not matter." Silas opened his laptop and started drafting the legal requests. The sadness I had felt in the parking deck was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, methodical energy. My parents thought they could humiliate me into submission. They did not realize that while they were busy managing their public image, I was mapping out their financial ruin. And what the forensic audit would uncover a few days later was a secret so damaging it would shatter the foundation of my brother's entire life. Silas Montgomery did not waste time. By the time I left his office that Friday afternoon, he had already drafted the financial subpoenas. Because my grandmother had kept such precise records, Silas did not have to go on a blind fishing expedition. He knew exactly which banks to target, which routing numbers to request, and which exact dates matched the stolen funds. He expedited the filings through a friendly federal judge who despised elder exploitation. While the Historical Society placed me on administrative leave, they unwittingly gave me the greatest tactical gift possible: uninterrupted time. I spent the next 8 days sitting at a glass conference table in downtown Atlanta, preparing for war. Evelyn Reed joined us on Tuesday morning. She walked into the law firm carrying a sleek silver laptop and a thermos of espresso. We had the legal authority to request the documents, but we needed Evelyn to translate the raw financial data. Silas was the legal sword, but Evelyn was the financial scalpel. The bank records arrived in encrypted digital batches, hundreds of pages of transaction histories. I sat beside Evelyn for hours, cross-referencing every single bank transfer against the handwritten entries in Beatrice's red leather ledger. At first glance, the pattern looked simple. On a Tuesday, $40,000 would vanish from Beatrice's investment portfolio. On Wednesday, $40,000 would appear in a checking account owned by my father. But Thomas did not keep the money. He knew that parking stolen funds in his personal checking accounts would trigger automated audits from the Internal Revenue Service. The money never stayed still for more than 48 hours. It bounced from his checking account to secondary regional banks, and then it disappeared into a complex web of obscure business accounts. I watched Evelyn type the secondary routing numbers into her database. Her eyes narrowed as the corporate names populated on her glowing screen. "These are not standard investment portfolios," Evelyn murmured, tapping her manicured nail against the keyboard. "These are limited liability companies, shell corporations." She pulled up the state business registry and typed in the name of the first company, a holding firm registered in Delaware. The registered agent was a downtown Atlanta law firm, but the primary corporate officer was listed plain as day: Liam Murphy. I leaned closer to the monitor. My brother's name stared back at me. Evelyn pulled up the next routing number. Another shell company. Another corporate filing. Liam Murphy again. We spent the next 6 hours mapping the architecture of my family's hidden economy. The truth unfolding on that computer screen was breathtakingly logical and deeply sinister. My father did not just spend my grandmother's money on country club dues or luxury cars. He funneled the stolen cash directly into Liam's endless string of failed tech startups. I remembered sitting at the Sunday dinner table in Alpharetta, watching my father slide seed money checks to my brother for his ridiculous wine curation application. I remembered listening to them talk loudly about venture capital and disruptive market visions. They were not talking about legitimate business. They were talking about money laundering. Evelyn broke down the mechanics of the scheme. She explained it like a professor teaching a masterclass in financial crimes. "It works like a washing machine," Evelyn told me. "Your father steals raw, untaxed cash from your grandmother. He needs a way to legitimize that money so the government does not ask questions. So he plays the role of an angel investor. He injects the stolen funds into Liam's startup companies under the guise of venture capital." I stared at the spreadsheets, watching the puzzle pieces interlock perfectly. "Once the money sits in the corporate account," Evelyn continued, "Liam pays himself an exorbitant executive salary. He leases luxury vehicles under the company name. He expenses lavish dinners and vacations. He drains the corporate account dry, playing the role of a highly successful founder. When the money is gone, he simply declares the business a failure and files for corporate bankruptcy." "And my father?" I asked, the realization chilling my blood. "What does he get out of a bankrupt company?" "A significant tax deduction," Evelyn said. "Your father writes off the seed money as a capital investment loss. He lowers his own tax burden by claiming he lost money on a bad business venture. The government rewards him for a financial loss he funded entirely with stolen money." It was a closed loop. A flawless criminal ecosystem. My father played the generous patriarch funding his son's dreams. My brother played the brilliant entrepreneur. Together, they washed millions of dollars in stolen elder funds right under my nose, using the illusion of the tech industry to hide their tracks. My brother was not a failed businessman. He was a complicit mule. He was the vital pipeline my father needed to clean the cash. That was why Liam was the golden child. That was why my parents protected him, praised him, and funded his every whim. Liam held the keys to their freedom. If Liam ever went down, he would take my father down with him. I sat back in the leather conference chair. The air in the room felt thin. I thought about the decades of emotional neglect. I thought about my mother telling me I was just too independent, while Liam actually needed them. They did not exclude me because I lacked ambition. They excluded me because I could not be bought. My career as an archivist was built on preserving the truth. I spent my days verifying historical facts and organizing public records. I was the exact opposite of a shell company. I spent 32 years thinking I was not good enough for my family. Turns out I was just too honest for their cartel. Have you ever uncovered a family secret that changed your entire reality? Have you ever found a single piece of paper that rewrote decades of your own history? Tell me about it in the comments. Finding out your parents are actual white-collar criminals requires a very specific type of grieving process. You do not mourn the parents you lost. You mourn the fact that they never existed in the first place. Silas gathered the printed bank statements from the tray and stacked them into a neat, thick pile. He placed the neurologist report on top. Violet Silas said, his voice grave and low. We crossed the threshold of a civil probate dispute 3 hours ago. This is tax evasion. This is federal wire fraud. This is an organized racketeering operation. If we take this to the authorities, your father will face a federal indictment. Your brother will follow him to prison. I looked at the thick stack of papers. A week ago, I might have hesitated. A week ago, the lingering ghost of family loyalty might have made me pause. But my mother had just tried to destroy my career with a coordinated smear campaign. My brother had threatened to bring sledgehammers to my grandmother's legacy. My father had stood in a hospital hallway and lied to my face while my grandmother took her final breaths. They burned the bridge. I was just going to scatter the ashes. Print it all, I told Silas. Put every single transaction into a single binder. Include the corporate filings, the wire transfer receipts, and the medical clearance. Silas nodded, already reaching for his keyboard. Do you want me to draft a settlement demand, he asked. Or do we route this directly to the district attorney? Neither, I said. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. You are holding a loaded weapon, Violet. What do you intend to do with it? My father operates on the assumption that he controls his environment. He surrounds himself with wealthy friends and country club sycophants who validate his ego. He believes his money makes him untouchable. He thinks I am hiding in my apartment crying over my mother's social media posts and worrying about my suspended job. I stood up and grabbed my canvas tote bag. I am going to hand-deliver this to him, I said. I am going to walk into his territory, and I am going to let him know the cartel is closed. I left the law office with a sharp, clear purpose I had never felt before. I was not the quiet, obedient archivist anymore. I was the executor of my grandmother's justice. The trap was fully loaded. Now it was time to walk into the lion's den and put the trigger right in my father's hand. I left Silas Montgomery's office carrying a 3-inch thick binder filled with bank statements, corporate filings, and medical records. The drive north to Alpharetta took roughly 40 minutes. The landscape outside my window transitioned from the towering glass skyscrapers of downtown Atlanta to the sprawling manicured subdivisions of the northern suburbs. I did not wear my usual work attire. I had changed into a tailored navy dress I kept reserved for formal society galas. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe twist. I was channeling my grandmother Beatrice. She never raised her voice to win an argument. She just brought better ammunition. My father spent every Thursday afternoon at the Oak Hollow Country Club. For men like Thomas Murphy, a private country club is not just a place to play golf. It is a throne room. It is a sanctuary where they validate each other, secure lucrative business deals, and control the local narrative. He was sitting on the dining terrace right now, surrounded by other executives likely complaining about his ungrateful daughter while sipping a premium martini. He felt safe there. He felt untouchable. I pulled my car up to the valet stand. I handed the keys to the young attendant and walked up the wide stone steps. The heavy double doors opened into a grand foyer that smelled of fresh lilies and expensive cologne. The host at the front reception desk looked up, offering a polite smile that faltered the second he recognized me. I was not on his guest list. I did not stop walking. I navigated through the main dining room, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the polished hardwood floor. I stepped out onto the outdoor terrace. The afternoon sun hit the white linen tablecloths, casting sharp shadows across the patio. I spotted my father immediately. He sat at a prime corner table overlooking the 18th hole, flanked by three men I recognized from his corporate board of directors. He was leaning forward, his hands gesturing fluidly, playing the wounded patriarch. I heard him mention my grandmother. He was actively spinning the narrative, solidifying my mother's internet lies in the real world to protect his reputation. I walked up right behind his chair. The men sitting across the table saw me first. Their polite, wealthy smiles faded into guarded curiosity. My father noticed their sudden shift in focus and turned around in his seat. "Hello, Dad," I said. My voice was level and calm. He blinked, his facial muscles freezing for a fraction of a second. "Violet," he said, his tone a mixture of surprise and instant irritation. "What are you doing here? This is a private lunch." I did not wait for an invitation to sit. I stepped forward and dropped the heavy black binder right onto the pristine white tablecloth. The impact rattled his martini glass, sending a small splash of clear liquid over the rim. The sound drew the attention of the surrounding tables. Conversations paused. He looked at the binder, then back at me. His jaw tightened. "You are making a scene," he hissed, keeping his voice low to preserve his dignity in front of his peers. "Pick that up and leave immediately. We can discuss your behavior at home." I leaned down, resting both hands on the table. I brought my face close to his ear so his friends could not hear the specifics, but they could certainly watch the color drain from his skin. "We are not going to discuss anything at home," I whispered. I just spent the last 8 days conducting a forensic audit of the Beatrice Murphy estate. That binder contains the routing numbers for every single limited liability company you registered in Delaware. I paused, letting the words sink into his brain. "It contains the bank receipts for the stolen elder funds you funneled into your son's fake tech startups to launder the cash." I continued softly. "It contains the medical evaluation proving your power of attorney was a fraud. You used Liam as a mule. You built a cartel out of my grandmother's life savings." My father stopped breathing. He sat perfectly rigid. The ice in his drink settled with a faint clink. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The confident, booming executive was gone. I was looking at a terrified, trapped man. I stood up straight. I looked at the three men sitting across the table. They were staring at us in dead silence, their golf polo shirts suddenly looking very uncomfortable. They did not know what was in the binder, but they saw the sheer panic on their friend's face. I offered them a polite, chilling smile. I turned my attention back to my father. "I am giving you a 24-hour window," I said, allowing my voice to carry just enough for the table to hear the final terms. "You are going to force Patricia to drop her smear campaign. She will publicly retract her social media posts. And you are going to sign a document relinquishing all claims to the Savannah estate. If you do not meet those terms by noon tomorrow, I am handing that binder to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." My father stared at the black cover of the binder. His hands rested flat on his thighs. He could not even muster a single word of denial. The evidence of his financial crimes was sitting right next to his gin. Have you ever watched a bully realize they picked the wrong target? Tell me in the comments if you have ever turned the tables on someone who thought you were weak. It is a defining moment in human psychology. When a predator realizes the prey has teeth, their entire worldview collapses in real time. Seeing my father paralyzed by his own secrets was the most empowering moment I have ever experienced. I turned on my heel and walked away. I did not look back to see his reaction. I strode through the terrace across the dining room and out the front doors. I handed my ticket to the valet and waited for my car in the warm Georgia sun. My hands were not shaking. My heart was beating in a steady, powerful rhythm. For my entire life, I had let my father dictate my worth. I had accepted the breadcrumbs of his attention while he handed my brother a feast. But walking away from that country club, I tasted true power for the very first time. It was not the power of wealth or status. It was the untouchable power of the truth. I drove back toward Atlanta, knowing I had just dropped a bomb in the center of their universe. My father was a cornered animal now. He would speed home, open that binder, and realize I had mapped his entire criminal network. He would see the spreadsheets. He would tell my mother. The flawless Alpharetta facade would crack wide open. I knew the silence would not last long. Narcissists cannot handle an ultimatum without trying to manipulate the outcome. I expected a reaction, but I did not anticipate just how fast the meltdown would happen. That evening, my phone screen lit up with a call from Alpharetta. It was not my father calling to negotiate, it was my mother. And she was about to make the most catastrophic mistake of her entire life. The 24-hour deadline I handed my father at the country club was ticking like a metronome. I drove back to my modest apartment in Atlanta, unlocked the front door, and placed my keys on the counter. The evening sun was casting long, narrow shadows across my living room floor. My apartment was small, quiet, and filled with towering bookshelves. It was the exact opposite of the sprawling, chaotic mansion in Alpharetta. For the first time in my life, the silence in my home did not feel like isolation. It felt like a fortress. I knew the explosion was coming. Thomas Murphy was a man who operated on control. When someone shattered his control, he did not strategize. He panicked. And when my father panicked, he always delegated the emotional dirty work to the one person who knew exactly how to manipulate me. At 8:45 that evening, my phone illuminated on the kitchen island. I did not have to look at the screen to know who was calling. My father was likely pacing the length of his mahogany study, staring at the binder of evidence I had dropped on his table, drinking his third glass of bourbon, and realizing he was trapped. He would not call me. He was too proud to beg. Instead, he deployed his primary weapon. I picked up the phone. The caller identification displayed my mother's name, Patricia. Before I swiped the green button to answer, I took a very specific, very calculated step. I am an archivist. I deal in permanent records. I also live in Georgia, which is a one-party consent state. That means you are legally permitted to record any telephone conversation as long as you are an active participant in the dialogue. You do not need to inform the person on the other end of the line. I opened the voice memo application on my device. I pressed the red record icon. Then I answered the call and put it on speaker. "Hello, Mom," I said. My voice was steady, giving away nothing. The sound that came through the speaker was a jarring theatrical sob. "Violet," my mother cried out. Her voice was thick, wet, and pitched high with manufactured hysteria. "Violet, what are you doing to us?" I leaned against the kitchen counter and watched the digital timer on the recording application tick forward. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. I did not interrupt her. I let her spin her web. "We are your family." Patricia wept into the receiver. "Your father came home from the club looking like he was having a heart attack. He showed me the papers you left. How could you dig through our private finances like some kind of criminal? You are trying to destroy your own father over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated smoothly. "Yes," she gasped, seizing the opening. "We just wanted things to be fair, Violet. You have to understand that. You have always been so rigid, so unyielding. Your grandmother was losing her grip on reality. She was making terrible decisions. We had to step in to protect the estate, to protect Liam. We just wanted to make sure your brother was taken care of. You have a steady job. You do not need that massive house in Savannah. We were just balancing the scales." It was the ultimate gaslighting maneuver. She was standing in the wreckage of a federal tax fraud and money laundering operation, and she was trying to reframe it as a simple act of parental fairness. She was trying to make me feel guilty for uncovering their theft. 30 years ago, or even 3 weeks ago, that tone would have worked on me. I would have folded inward. I would have questioned my own reality. I would have wondered if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. But I had read the red leather ledger. I had seen the medical evaluation. I knew the truth, and the truth makes you immune to manipulation. I kept my eyes on the recording timer. I needed her to stop talking in vague terms. I needed her to anchor her justification to a specific, undeniable crime. I lowered my voice, adopting a tone of gentle, probing curiosity. I prodded her ego exactly where I knew it was most vulnerable. "Fair, Mom?" I asked quietly. "You think fairness is having Dad sign Grandma Beatrice's name on a legal document while she was lying unconscious in a hospital bed?" The line hesitated for a fraction of a second. My mother was operating on pure adrenaline terror and a desperate need to justify her own existence. When a narcissist feels their self-image being threatened, they do not pause to consult a lawyer. They attack the premise to prove they were right all along. "He had to," Patricia snapped. Her fake sobbing vanished instantly, replaced by a sharp, defensive venom. The tears evaporated, revealing the cold entitlement underneath. "Beatrice was going to leave it all to you. She told us she was cutting Liam out of the deed entirely. We could not let her do that to him. We were protecting our son, Violet. Your father did what any good parent would do to save their child from a vindictive old woman." The words hung in the air, echoing off the walls of my quiet apartment. The line went dead silent. It took about 4 seconds for her brain to catch up with her mouth. She had been so eager to defend her husband's actions, so desperate to prove that they were the righteous protectors of her golden child, that she forgot who she was talking to. She just admitted in plain, unambiguous language that my father had forged the signature because Beatrice was planning to leave the estate to me. She confessed to the motive, she confessed to the timeline, and she confessed to the crime. Violet, Patricia whispered. Her voice was suddenly very small, very frail. The venom was gone, replaced by a dawning, suffocating realization. "Violet, you know I did not mean it like that. You know your father loves you." I reached out and tapped the red square on my screen, stopping the voice memo. "I will see you in federal court, Mom," I said. I ended the call. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the audio file saved on my device. It was a 3-minute and 12-second recording. It was the final, incontrovertible piece of the puzzle. The forensic audit proved where the stolen money went. The neurologist report proved Beatrice was of sound mind. But this audio file proved intent. It was a recorded confession to felony forgery and conspiracy delivered straight from the mouth of a co-conspirator. Never interrupt a narcissist when they are defending themselves. Have you ever noticed that? They are so obsessed with proving their own twisted version of nobility that they will literally hand you the rope to hang them with. Tell me in the comments if you have ever let someone talk themselves into a corner. It requires a lot of discipline to stay quiet, but the payoff is always spectacular. I tapped the screen, attached the audio file to an encrypted email, and sent it directly to Silas Montgomery. I typed a single sentence in the subject line. Checkmate. My parents were broken. I had backed them into a corner they could not talk by or manipulate their way out of. My father had to either sign away his claim to the Savannah house by noon tomorrow or face an immediate referral to the federal authorities with a recorded confession attached. I went to sleep that night feeling a profound, heavy peace. The Alpharetta illusion was shattered, but I underestimated the sheer desperation of my brother. My parents were terrified of prison, but Liam was terrified of poverty. Liam had received the same bank notices from the commercial lender. He knew that if he could not produce $1.25 million in 29 days, his entire identity as a wealthy tech founder would evaporate. His luxury cars would be repossessed. His pageant queen wife would likely file for divorce the second his credit cards bounced. While my father was paralyzed by the evidence and my mother was melting down over the phone, my brother was taking erratic, destructive action. If Liam could not own the Savannah estate, he was going to make sure nobody could. At 6 in the morning, my phone woke me from a deep sleep. It was not my parents. It was a local Savannah area code. I answered groggily. It was Mrs. Gable, my grandmother's next-door neighbor, a woman who had lived adjacent to the estate for 40 years. Violet. Mrs. Gable said, her voice frantic over the line. I know it is early, dear, but you need to get down here right now. There are 3 heavy-duty construction trucks parked on your front lawn. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Construction trucks. They are unloading sledgehammers, Violet, Mrs. Gable continued. Your brother is standing on the porch, and he is telling the crew to start tearing down the original stained glass doors. The peace I had felt the night before vanished in an instant. Liam was going to destroy a century of history just to spite me. He was going to gut the property, strip it of its historic designation, and try to sell the raw coastal land to developers for a quick cash payout to cover his bank debt. I threw the blankets off the bed. The legal war was secure on paper, but the physical war for the house was happening right now. And I had to get to the coast before my brother turned my grandmother's legacy into a pile of shattered glass and splintered wood. I ended the call with Mrs. Gable and immediately dialed Silas Montgomery. It was 6:15 in the morning. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and alert. I explained what my neighbor had just told me. Construction trucks on the lawn, sledgehammers. Liam pacing the porch directing a crew to target the original architecture. Silas understood the threat instantly. He explained the real estate loophole my brother was trying to exploit. The Savannah estate was registered on the historic preservation list. You cannot just tear down a historic home to build modern condominiums. The zoning board would trap you in red tape for years. But if a property suffers catastrophic interior damage, if the structural integrity is compromised by exposure to the elements, the city is forced to condemn the building. Once a structure is condemned, the historic protections vanish. The lot becomes raw coastal land, and raw waterfront dirt in Savannah is worth a fortune to luxury developers. Liam did not want to renovate the kitchen. He wanted to swing a hammer through the load, bearing walls, shatter the antique windows, and expose the hardwood floors to the humid Georgia rain. He wanted to destroy the house so he could sell the dirt beneath it to pay off his bank debt before the federal investigators froze his assets. I threw on my clothes, grabbed my keys, and ran out the door. I put my car in gear and merged onto the interstate. I did not care about the speed limit. The speedometer hovered around 90 miles per hour. The tall pine trees blurred into a solid wall of green as I raced south. Silas stayed on the phone with me through the car speakers. He was already waking up a Superior Court judge in Chatham County. Because we had the pending federal fraud case, and because we had documented proof of the forged power of attorney, Silas was filing an emergency ex parte injunction. He promised to have a local sheriff deputy intercept me at the property. The entire drive I thought about Liam. When we were children, whenever Liam was losing a board game, he would flip the table. If he could not win, he made sure nobody else could play. My parents always excused it as a competitive spirit, but it was not competitive. It was a severe, unchecked entitlement. He was 35 years old, and he was still flipping the table. Only this time, the table was our grandmother's legacy. I reached the Savannah city limits in record time. I turned off the highway and navigated the cobblestone streets, the tires of my car screeching as I took the final turn onto the gravel driveway. Mrs. Gable had not exaggerated. 3 white work trucks were parked directly on the front lawn, their tires tearing deep trenches into the manicured grass. A crew of 6 men in neon safety vests were pulling tools from the truck beds, sawzalls, pry bars, and long-handled sledgehammers. And there was Liam. He was standing on the wide veranda wearing designer sunglasses and a pastel polo shirt, looking like a country club spectator watching a demolition derby. He was pointing toward the front entrance. The front entrance was not just a door, it was a pair of double-wide antique stained glass doors. Beatrice had sourced them from a ruined church in Charleston 20 years ago. The glass panels depicted heron wading through blue marshes. They were irreplaceable. They were art. 2 contractors were walking up the wooden steps, holding their steel sledgehammers resting on their shoulders. I slammed my car into park. I did not even turn off the engine. I threw my door open and sprinted across the crushed oyster shells. "Stop!" I shouted. My voice cut through the humid morning air sharp and clear. The two contractors paused on the steps looking over their shoulders. Liam turned around. When he saw me running across the lawn, his jaw tightened. He waved his hand at the workers, dismissing my presence. "Ignore her," Liam ordered. "Break the glass. Get the frames out." The lead contractor gripped his hammer with both hands, stepping up to the porch. He planted his feet, winding his shoulders back to swing the steel head directly into the center of the stained glass heron. I did not think. I did not calculate the risk. I simply ran up the stairs and placed myself between the swinging hammer and the antique glass. I put my back against the doors and held my hands up. The contractor cursed, dropping the hammer toward the floorboards to stop his momentum. The metal struck the wooden porch with a dull, heavy thud, missing my leg by a few inches. He took a step back, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Lady, you need to move," the foreman said, his voice laced with annoyance. "We have a work order. You have a fraudulent work order," I replied, my chest heaving. "The man who hired you does not hold clear title to this property. This estate is an active crime scene, and if you damage one single pane of glass, you will be named as an accessory in a federal lawsuit." The foreman looked at me, then looked at Liam. Contractors in Savannah know the laws regarding historic properties. They know the penalties for unauthorized demolition. The foreman lowered his tool. Liam marched across the porch. His face was a mottled, furious red. The designer sunglasses could not hide the panic radiating from his posture. "Move, Violet," he snarled. "You are trespassing. I own this property, and I have the right to renovate it." "You do not want to renovate it," I said, keeping my back pressed against the warm glass. "You want to gut it. You want the city to condemn it so you can sell the dirt to pay off your commercial loan." Liam flinched. The color drained from his face for a second. He did not know that I understood his financial strategy. He thought I was just an archivist holding on to sentimental memories. He stepped closer, dropping his voice to a venomous whisper. "You did this," he hissed. "You set me up. You and your shark lawyer. If I do not get the cash from this lot by the end of the month, the bank is going to freeze my accounts. Jessica is already packing her bags. You ruined my life, Violet." Before I could answer him, the sound of sirens echoed down the quiet street. A white Chatham County Sheriff Patrol vehicle turned into the driveway, the red and blue lights flashing against the oak trees. The vehicle rolled to a stop, right behind the work trucks. A tall, broad-shouldered deputy stepped out. He was holding a yellow manila folder. He walked up the brick pathway, bypassing the confused construction workers, and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "I am looking for Liam Murphy," the deputy announced. Liam crossed his arms. "I am Liam Murphy. I called the police on this woman 2 days ago. She is trespassing on my job site." The deputy did not look at me. He opened the yellow folder and handed a thick stack of stapled papers to my brother. "You are being served with an emergency court injunction, sir," the deputy said. "A superior court judge signed it 20 minutes ago. All demolition, alteration, and entry to this property are halted immediately pending a federal fraud investigation. If you or these workers swing a hammer on this parcel, you will be arrested for violating a court order." The foreman did not need to hear another word. He whistled sharply, signaling his crew. "Pack it up, boys," the foreman yelled. "We are not touching this mess." The workers turned around, carried their tools back to the trucks, and started their engines. Within 2 minutes, the trucks were rolling down the driveway, leaving the estate quiet once again. Liam stood on the porch, holding the legal papers. His hands were shaking. The paper rattled in his grip. The reality of his situation was finally crashing down around him. There was no escape hatch. There was no raw land to sell. The bank debt was coming, and he had nothing left to shield him. He looked up at me. The arrogant tech founder was gone. The golden child was dead. I was looking at a broken, pathetic man who had spent his entire life riding on our father's coattails, only to find out the coat was stolen. "You did this to me," Liam whispered, his voice cracking. "You took everything." I stepped away from the stained glass doors. I looked at the brother who had never defended me, never supported me, and eagerly signed up to steal the only thing I loved. "I did not do anything, Liam," I said quietly. I just stopped letting you take from me. You ruined yourself. I turned to the deputy. Officer, I said, this man is no longer permitted on the premises. Please escort him off the property. The deputy nodded and gestured toward Liam's vehicle. Let us go, sir, he said. Liam did not fight. He did not yell. He walked down the steps like a ghost, got into his pristine luxury SUV, and drove away. I watched his car disappear down the street. Then I turned around, took my iron key from my pocket, and locked the front door from the inside. The physical house was safe. The structural walls of my grandmother's legacy were intact, but the war was not over. My father had received the 24-hour ultimatum at the country club. He knew the FBI referral was looming. He knew the forensic audit was complete. And when a cornered corporate executive realizes he cannot win through intimidation or physical destruction, he resorts to the oldest tactic in the corporate playbook. He tries to buy his way out. As I sat on the quiet Savannah porch, my phone rang. It was not my father. It was a man identifying himself as a crisis management consultant. The blackmail settlement offer was coming, and the price tag they attached to my silence was about to test every boundary I had left. I sat on the quiet Savannah porch long after the sheriff deputy escorted my brother away from the property. The heavy, humid Georgia air was still. The original stained glass doors behind me were unbroken. The physical house was safe. But I knew my father was not a man who accepted defeat simply because his initial strategy failed. Thomas Murphy was a corporate executive. When intimidation did not yield results, he resorted to the oldest tactic in the corporate playbook. He attempted to buy his way out. My phone rang just before noon. The caller identification displayed an unknown number. I answered it, expecting another one of my mother's theatrical performances, or perhaps my father finally losing his temper. Instead, a smooth baritone voice greeted me. The man introduced himself as Julian Cross. He did not call himself a lawyer. He used the term crisis management consultant. In the world of high-stakes wealth, a crisis manager is a fixer. They are the people hired to make scandals vanish before they hit the public record. Julian told me he represented my father's interests, and he requested a brief private meeting to discuss a mutual resolution. We met 3 hours later in a private dining room at a luxury hotel near the Savannah Historic District. Julian wore a tailored charcoal suit and a practiced disarming smile. His eyes, however, held zero empathy. He treated the destruction of my family like a simple corporate merger. He did not waste time with small talk. He opened his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and slid them across the polished mahogany table. Your father is prepared to be very generous, Violet, Julian said, his voice calm and rhythmic. We recognize that the probate amendment was filed hastily. We want to rectify that error and avoid a drawn-out legal battle that benefits no one. I looked down at the documents. It was a settlement agreement. If you sign this contract today, Julian explained, Thomas will immediately execute a quitclaim deed, transferring Liam's half of the Savannah estate back to you. You will own the property free and clear. Furthermore, Thomas has authorized a direct wire transfer of $500,000 from his personal accounts into yours tax-free. He paused, letting the number hang in the air. $500,000. And in exchange, I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. In exchange, Julian replied smoothly, you sign a binding non-disclosure agreement. You surrender the original red ledger to my office. You delete the audio recording of your mother. You agree to never speak of the offshore accounts or the startup ventures again. We close the book, Violet. You get your grandmother's house and financial independence. Your father keeps his reputation. Everyone wins. I stared at the thick cream-colored paper. I worked as an archivist, making $42,000 a year. $500,000 was a life-altering sum of money. It was security. It was a brand new beginning. My father was trying to place a price tag on my silence, and he had chosen a very high number. As I sat there looking at the contract, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. It was a text message from my mother, Patricia. Please, Violet, the text read, take the money. Do not send your father to prison. We can heal from this if you just let it go. I stared at the glowing screen. The pressure pressing down on my chest was immense. The money was tempting, but the text message was the real weapon. Despite everything they had done, despite the years of neglect and the deliberate theft, a small, fragile part of me still ached for my mother's approval. I was still the little girl sitting at the end of the dining table in Alpharetta, waiting for someone to look at me with pride. My mother was offering me a twisted version of peace. She was promising that we could heal, but only if I swept their crimes under the rug. Have you ever been offered a shortcut that required you to sell a piece of your soul? Drop a comment and tell me if you have ever had to walk away from something tempting because the moral cost was too high. It is a terrifying crossroads. I did not sign the contract in that hotel room. I told Julian I needed 24 hours to review the terms with my legal counsel. He smiled, assuming he had already won, and told me to take my time. I drove straight back to Atlanta and walked into Silas Montgomery's law firm. Evelyn Reed was already sitting in the conference room. I placed the settlement offer and the non-disclosure agreement on the glass table. I showed them the text message from my mother. I sat back in my chair, feeling the sheer exhaustion of the last few weeks settling into my bones. "The house is safe," I said quietly. "If I sign this, I get the Savannah estate. I get $500,000. The war is over." Silas read through the contract, his brow furrowed. "Legally, it is a sound offer," he murmured. "The non-disclosure agreement is ironclad. If you sign this and you ever mention the wire fraud to anyone, Thomas can sue you into oblivion." I turned to Evelyn. The financial shark was sipping a cup of black tea, her sharp eyes studying my face. She did not look at the contract. She looked right through me. "You came to me because you wanted to honor Beatrice," Evelyn said. Her voice was gentle, a rare departure from her usual razor-sharp tone. "Beatrice did not keep that ledger for 8 years, so you could negotiate a payout. She kept it so you could hold them accountable." Evelyn leaned forward, resting her hands on the table. "This is not about the money anymore, Violet," she told me. "It is about what you can live with. If you take that $500,000, where do you think it comes from? It comes from the same accounts your father used to launder your grandmother's stolen life savings. If you take the hush money, you become a participant in their ecosystem." The words struck me like a physical blow. Evelyn was right. My father was not offering me a gift. He was offering me a bribe funded by his own theft. He was trying to make me complicit. He wanted to buy my integrity, so he would never have to feel guilty about lacking his own. I looked at my phone again. I read my mother's text message one more time. "Do not send your father to prison. We can heal from this." She did not say she was sorry. She did not say she loved me. She only cared about protecting the architect of her wealthy lifestyle. There was no healing waiting for me in Alpharetta. There was only a lifetime of forced smiles and buried secrets. I realized that taking the hush money would make me exactly like them. It would mean I valued comfort over the truth. I picked up the thick settlement contract. I tore it in half. I tossed the torn paper into the center of the conference table. I looked at Silas. "Reject the settlement," I instructed. "Tell Julian Cross we are not for sale." Silas smiled, a sharp, dangerous grin spreading across his face. He closed his folder. "What is our next move, Violet?" "We stop playing defense," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "File the lawsuit, Silas. File it in federal court. I want everything on the public record." Silas did not hesitate. He spent the next 4 hours finalizing the paperwork. We were not filing a standard probate dispute. Silas was utilizing the evidence of the shell companies, the wire transfers, and the forged medical narrative to file a civil RICO claim. Racketeer influenced and corrupt organizations. It is a specific legal statute designed to dismantle organized criminal enterprises. By filing a civil RICO suit alongside the elder fraud charges, Silas elevated my family from bad relatives to an organized criminal syndicate. Once a lawsuit of that magnitude is filed in a federal district court, it becomes a matter of public record. There are no secrets in federal court. There are no non-disclosure agreements to hide behind. The reporters can see it. The country club members can see it. The bank lenders can see it. At 4 in the afternoon, Silas hit the submit button on his computer, filing the documents electronically with the United States District Court. The war was no longer happening in private dining rooms or through manipulative text messages. The war was officially public. My parents had spent their entire lives cultivating a flawless, wealthy image, and I had just set a match to the curtain. I walked out of the law firm, knowing the point of no return was behind me. The next time I saw my father, my mother, and my brother, we would not be sitting at a Sunday dinner table. We would be sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of a federal deposition room, and under those lights, backed into a corner with federal prison looming over their heads, the illusion of their family loyalty was going to evaporate. I was about to watch the golden child turn on his own creators to save himself. The federal lawsuit triggered a swift and merciless legal process. We bypassed the slow local courts and entered the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. My parents had spent their entire lives treating wealth as a shield, but the federal justice system operates on a scale where local country club influence means nothing. Within 3 weeks of Silas filing the civil RICO suit, we were sitting in a sterile, heavily air-conditioned conference room in downtown Atlanta for the official discovery depositions. A federal deposition is not a dramatic courtroom scene. There is no judge, there is no jury. There is only a long table, a court reporter typing every spoken word onto the public record, and the crushing weight of sworn testimony. I sat on one side of the vast table with Silas Montgomery and Evelyn Reed. Across from us sat my father, my mother, and my brother. They had each hired separate defense attorneys, a clear sign that the unified front of the Alpharetta family portrait was already fracturing. Thomas Murphy looked different. The confident, booming executive who had sneered at me in the law office a month ago was gone. His skin was gray. His tailored suit looked a size too large. The threat of a federal indictment had aged him a decade in 3 weeks. Patricia sat next to him, gripping a tissue, staring at the table. Liam sat furthest away from our parents, his arms crossed tight across his chest, his knee bouncing in a frantic, nervous rhythm. Silas did not start with aggression. He started with precision. He placed the red leather ledger in the center of the table. Mr. Murphy, Silas began, his voice calm and methodical. Are you familiar with the Delaware holding company known as Apex Innovations? Thomas cleared his throat. His high-priced defense attorney leaned in, whispering something into his ear. Yes, my father answered, his voice tight. I provided initial seed funding for that venture. Silas slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a bank record obtained during our forensic audit. According to this transaction history, Silas stated you wired $65,000 to Apex Innovations on March 14th. 2 days prior to that wire, exactly $65,000 was withdrawn from the primary investment portfolio of your mother, Beatrice Murphy. Can you explain that sequence of events? My father shifted in his chair. As the legal power of attorney, I was managing her assets to ensure liquid capital was available for her care. He lied smoothly. The investment in Apex was a separate personal transaction. Silas nodded, as if expecting that exact response. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out the neurologist report. He slid it across the table right next to the bank record. This is a medical evaluation from Dr. Eris Thorne, Silas said. It was conducted 7 days before Beatrice suffered her stroke. The report explicitly states she possessed pristine cognitive function and full capacity to manage her own financial affairs. Your power of attorney was enacted based on an affidavit claiming rapid onset dementia. Thomas stared at the medical report. His defense attorney reached out and pulled the document closer, reading the signature. The color drained from the attorney's face. Given this clean bill of cognitive health, Silas continued, the power of attorney you filed is legally fraudulent, which means the $65,000 you moved on March 12th was not managed. It was stolen. And because you transferred those stolen funds across state lines into a Delaware holding company, you committed federal wire fraud. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. You used a shell corporation to launder stolen elder funds, Silas stated, leaving no room for ambiguity. Thomas opened his mouth to object, but Silas was not finished. He turned his attention to my brother. And you, Liam, were the registered agent for Apex Innovations. You received the stolen funds, you spent the capital, you filed the corporate bankruptcy to secure the tax write-off for your father. Liam stopped bouncing his knee. He looked at Silas, then darted a terrified glance at his own attorney. I did not know where the money came from, Liam stammered. I was just running a startup. Dad handled the funding. Silas smiled. It was a cold, surgical expression. He opened his laptop and angled the screen toward the center of the table. Let us address the intent behind these actions. Let us hear exactly how this family managed their assets. Silas pressed the spacebar. The audio file I had recorded in my apartment played through the laptop speakers. My mother's voice, thick with panic and venom, filled the sterile conference room. He had to. The recorded voice of Patricia snapped. Beatrice was going to leave it all to you. We could not let her do that to him. We were protecting our son Violet. Your father did what any good parent would do to save their child from a vindictive old woman. The recording ended. Silas closed the laptop. Patricia buried her face in her hands. A strangled sob escaped her throat. Thomas stared at his wife, absolute horror, etching lines into his face. His own defense attorney physically recoiled, pushing his chair an inch away from the table. An audio confession to felony forgery and conspiracy was the kind of evidence that ended careers and guaranteed prison sentences. The silence that followed was absolute devastation. The Alpharetta illusion was shattered on the official federal record. And then the golden child broke. Liam stood up so fast his chair tipped backward, crashing onto the carpet. He pointed a trembling finger directly at our father. I did not know the money was stolen, Liam shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. I did not forge the will. Dad set up the LLCs. He told me to sign the incorporation papers. It was all him. He used me. Thomas stared up at his son in utter betrayal. Liam, my father whispered, his voice cracking. Do not talk to me! Liam screamed, backing away from the table. I am not going to federal prison for you. You ruined my life. I am telling the prosecutors everything. I want full immunity. Liam looked at his attorney, his chest heaving. Get me a deal, Liam demanded. Now. I sat quietly on my side of the table. I did not feel the need to speak. I watched the family loyalty they had touted for 30 years evaporate in a matter of seconds. When the threat of federal prison entered the room, the protective facade dissolved. The golden child did not hesitate to sacrifice the architect of his entire wealthy existence to save his own skin. When you build a family on lies and money, do not be surprised when they sell you out for a discount. Type the word loyalty in the comments if you agree. Watching my brother turn on our parents was a profound lesson in human nature. People who value status over integrity will always devour each other when the status is threatened. Silas leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. The deposition was effectively over. My father's legal defense was obliterated by his own wife's confession and his son's immediate defection. The civil RICO suit was a guaranteed victory, and the criminal referrals were now inevitable. We walked out of the conference room 10 minutes later. The humid Atlanta air felt lighter than it had in months. The war for the truth was won. The evidence was secured on the record. But the final legal resolution was still pending. The federal judge still needed to issue the official ruling regarding the Savannah estate and the massive commercial loan my family had triggered. And as we prepared for the final courtroom hearing, I knew my parents were going to make one last desperate plea for mercy. They were going to look at the millions in debt they owed and beg me to save them. And I was preparing to deliver a payoff my grandmother had designed perfectly. It had been 4 weeks since my brother fractured our family inside that sterile deposition room. The final hearing took place in the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in downtown Atlanta. The architecture of a federal courthouse is designed to make you feel small. It is built with heavy limestone and dark oak paneling. The air smells of lemon polish and aged paper. It serves as a physical reminder that the laws discussed inside are unbreakable. My parents walked into the courtroom looking like strangers. They did not sit together. My mother chose a seat in the second row of the public gallery. She was clutching a designer handbag that would soon be seized by creditors. Growing up, Patricia always taught me that perception was more important than reality. She came from a working-class neighborhood she spent her entire adult life trying to erase. She married my father because he offered her a shield of wealth. She protected that shield with ruthless dedication, even if it meant sacrificing her own daughter to maintain the illusion. Now sitting on the hard wooden bench, her shield was gone. Her designer clothes looked like a costume on an actor who had forgotten her lines. My father sat at the defense table, his shoulders slumped. Thomas Murphy spent 30 years climbing the corporate ladder by stepping on anyone who showed vulnerability. He viewed empathy as a liability. He believed his money made him untouchable. He assumed his expensive lawyers could find a loophole in any contract. But federal judges do not care about country club memberships. They care about paper trails. Liam sat on the far edge of the wooden bench. He refused to make eye contact with the man who had funded his entire life. The golden child was finally facing the real world, and he looked terrified. His wife Jessica was noticeably absent. The presiding official was Judge Rosalind Carter. Judge Carter was a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a tight twist. She did not tolerate theatrics. She possessed a reputation for dismantling white-collar criminals with surgical precision. She wore her black robe like armor. Silas Montgomery stood at our table and presented the evidence we had gathered. He did not boast. He spoke with quiet authority. He submitted the vintage red ledger. He provided the forensic audit tracing the stolen funds through the Delaware shell companies. He handed over the neurologist report clearing my grandmother of dementia. Finally, he submitted the official transcript of the deposition highlighting my mother admitting to the forgery and my brother turning state witness. Judge Carter read through the documents in silence. The only sound in the vast courtroom was the rustle of heavy paper. My father stared at his hands. He knew the illusion was over. For decades, he had used his wealth to manipulate reality. He bought his way out of consequences and silenced anyone who challenged his narrative. But the documents on the bench were undeniable. Judge Carter adjusted her reading glasses and looked down. Her voice was firm, carrying across the silent room without the need for a microphone. She did not deliver a long speech. She delivered consequences. The court finds the amended probate documents to be fraudulent, Judge Carter stated. The signature on the power of attorney was executed under false pretenses. Therefore, the amended will is officially voided. The court recognizes the original testament of Beatrice Murphy as the sole legally binding document. The Savannah waterfront estate belongs entirely to Violet Murphy. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 2 months. The house was mine. The legacy I had built with my grandmother was safe. The historic stained glass doors, the original pine floors, the sprawling porch where we spent our summers. It was all protected. But the judge was not finished. She turned her attention to my father and my brother. By fraudulently filing the forged deed to assume ownership of the Savannah property, Judge Carter continued Thomas and Liam Murphy willingly assumed all liabilities attached to that estate. The commercial lender has exercised the due on transfer clause. The debt of $2,500,000 is legitimate. Because the transfer was executed under criminal fraud, this court rules that the liability remains with the fraudulent parties. Thomas and Liam Murphy are solely responsible for the immediate repayment of the commercial note. The gavel struck the sounding block. The sound echoed like a gunshot. My father closed his eyes. His high-priced defense attorney packed his briefcase and looked away. The ruling meant instant financial ruin. The bank would seize my father's investment accounts. They would place liens on the Alpharetta mansion. They would liquidate his luxury vehicles and garnish his corporate wages. Liam would lose his pristine credit, his startup illusion, and his marriage. Jessica would not stay with a man drowning in a 7-figure debt. They had gambled their entire kingdom to steal my inheritance, and they had lost everything. I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched karma catch up to someone who hurt you? Tell me in the comments how it felt. Because sitting in that courtroom watching the gravity of their ruin sink in, I did not feel joy. I felt a profound, heavy clarity. They were reaping the exact harvest they had planted, but the hearing was not over. The trap my grandmother set had one final mechanism, and the judge was about to trigger it. Judge Carter folded her hands on top of the case file. She looked directly at me. "Ms. Murphy," she said gently, "the court notes the financial mechanics your grandmother utilized prior to her passing. The $2.5 million extracted from the Savannah equity currently sits in an offshore trust. The court also notes that you are the sole named beneficiary of that trust." I stood up, keeping my posture straight. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. Judge Carter looked at my family, then looked back at me. "Your father and your brother are facing total bankruptcy," the judge stated softly. "The fraud investigation is moving forward, but this specific commercial debt is immediate. Do you intend to use the funds in your offshore trust to alleviate this debt, or do you intend to enforce the collection and allow the default?" The entire courtroom stopped breathing. I felt the weight of every eye in the room shift onto my shoulders. Silas Montgomery stood silently beside me. Evelyn Reed watched me from the gallery. I slowly turned my head and looked at my family. My father was staring at me. His arrogant posture was gone. He looked small, defeated, and desperate. His eyes were begging me for a lifeline. He was silently asking me to save the wealth he had spent his life hoarding. My mother gripped the wooden railing of the gallery bench. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She mouthed the word, "please." She was pleading with the daughter she had marginalized, gaslit, and publicly humiliated just weeks prior. Even Liam looked up. His jaw trembled. He knew his fate rested entirely in my hands. This was the moment of ultimate power. I held the keys to their salvation and the keys to their destruction. I possessed the offshore funds that could erase the bank debt and save them from bankruptcy. I could pay off the commercial loan, clear their ledgers, and show them the mercy they had never shown me. I could be the bigger person. I could prove that I was better than their greed. If you were standing in my shoes, what would you do? Would you pay the debt and save your family from financial ruin? Or would you let the bank take everything they owned? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Think about the years of exclusion. Think about the forged documents while your grandmother lay dying. Think about the smear campaign that cost you your job. I looked at the people who shared my blood. I thought about the little girl who sat near the kitchen doors during Sunday dinners waiting for a scrap of validation. I thought about the archivist who almost lost her career because her mother wanted to win a social media war. I took a deep breath, standing in the silence of the courtroom. The microphone on the plaintiff table sat waiting for my answer. The judge waited. My lawyers waited. My family waited. Their breath caught in their throats. They needed me to shrink myself one last time to save them. The decision I made next would determine the rest of their lives. I stood up, slowly making sure my footing was solid. The air in the courtroom felt thick, charged with the kind of anticipation that precedes a storm. I looked at the judge, then let my gaze drift over to my family. My father's knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the defense table. My mother's makeup was streaked with tears, her expression a mix of terror and fragile hope. Liam wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared fixedly at the floor, his entire body rigid. They thought they knew the game we were playing. They believed they were dealing with the same Violet they had always known, the quiet, compliant archivist who could eventually be pressured or bought. They assumed the $2.5 million offshore trust was a personal account, a war chest I had inherited, and that the only thing standing between them and financial salvation was my willingness to write a check. They underestimated my grandmother, and they fundamentally misunderstood me. "Your Honor?" I began, my voice steady and resonant in the cavernous room. "The court is correct that the $2.5 million extracted from the Savannah estate was placed into an offshore trust. And it is true that I am the sole named executor of that entity." My father exhaled a sharp, jagged breath. I saw his shoulders drop a fraction of an inch, a microscopic physical manifestation of relief. He thought the negotiation was about to begin. He thought he could leverage his status as my father to extract a concession. However, I continued, pausing deliberately to ensure every word landed with maximum impact. That trust is not a personal bank account. The silence in the courtroom deepened. The court reporter's hands stilled over the stenotype machine. Following Beatrice Murphy's explicit ironclad legal instructions, I said maintaining eye contact with Judge Carter. The capital within that offshore entity was irrevocably transferred on the exact date of her passing. The funds were locked into a newly established, federally recognized 501c3 educational charitable foundation. My father's head snapped up, his eyes widened, the fragile hope shattering instantly. The sole legal charter of the Beatrice Murphy Foundation, I elaborated, is the acquisition, restoration, and permanent protection of historic properties within the state of Georgia. The bylaws explicitly prohibit the disbursement of funds for any private debt, personal liability, or familial settlement. The money is entirely out of my hands, Your Honor. I could not use those funds to pay off my family's commercial loan even if I wanted to. I turned my head slowly, directing my final statement not to the judge, but to the defense table. My grandmother did not just build a trap to catch thieves, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register. She ensured that the greed of the people who stole from her would directly fund a public charity dedicated to the exact history they tried to destroy. The money is gone. The courtroom remained frozen for a long, agonizing moment. The sheer brilliance of Beatrice's final maneuver hung in the air, an undeniable masterpiece of legal strategy and poetic justice. She had weaponized their entitlement. She had turned their desperate grab for wealth into a forced philanthropic donation. Judge Carter leaned back in her high leather chair. A slow, subtle nod of deep respect acknowledged the flawless architecture of the plan. She looked at the defense table, and the severity returned to her expression. The court acknowledges the status of the charitable foundation, Judge Carter stated, her voice returning to its authoritative cadence. The ruling stands. Thomas and Liam Murphy remain solely and immediately liable for the $2.5 million commercial debt. The clerk will transmit the findings of forgery, wire fraud, and elder exploitation to the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia for criminal prosecution. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel fell. It was the sound of a kingdom collapsing. Thomas Murphy collapsed backward into his chair. The man who had spent 30 years controlling every narrative, bullying every subordinate, and hoarding every dollar, was reduced to a hollow shell. He was completely bankrupt. The bank would seize the Alpharetta mansion. His investment accounts would be frozen and liquidated. His corporate reputation was annihilated, and he was heading directly into a federal criminal indictment. He stared blankly at the mahogany table, unable to process the totality of his ruin. Patricia broke the silence. She let out a loud, visceral sob, burying her face in her hands. The performance was over. This was raw, unadulterated panic. The socialite facade was destroyed. The country club memberships, the designer clothes, the affluent friend group, all of it was gone, traded for the reality of impending poverty and her own criminal exposure for conspiracy. Liam remained frozen, his gaze fixed on the floor. He was a 35-year-old man with millions in liabilities, zero assets, and a documented history of corporate fraud. He had sacrificed his parents to save himself, only to realize the lifeboat was already sinking. The golden child was finally facing a problem that his father's checkbook could not solve. I did not wait for them to stand. I did not linger to watch them being processed by the court officers. I picked up my canvas tote bag, the same bag that had carried the vintage red ledger and the tiny brass key. I turned and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors swung open, leading out into the bright marbled hallway. Silas Montgomery walked beside me, his briefcase in hand. Evelyn Reed waited near the elevators, a rare, genuine smile touching the corners of her mouth. We did not speak as we rode the elevator down to the lobby. There was no need for words. The logic of the outcome was absolute. The trap had sprung flawlessly, catching the predators exactly where they had tried to feed. I walked out of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building and into the warm Atlanta afternoon. The sun was shining. The city noise washed over me, the hum of traffic, the distant wail of a siren, the chatter of pedestrians. It was the sound of the real world, a world my family had tried to insulate themselves against with stolen money and lies. I did not look back at the courthouse. I left my abusers behind, entrusting them to the unforgiving machinery of the federal justice system. They had spent my entire life trying to erase me, trying to make me small. But in the end, the quiet archivist had written the final chapter of their history. The legal war was over, but the aftermath of such a profound disruption always leaves a changed landscape. The estate in Savannah was secure, the charitable foundation was funded, and my parents were facing the consequences of their actions. But as the adrenaline of the courtroom faded, a new, quieter reality began to settle in. A reality where the defining conflict of my life was resolved, leaving behind a blank canvas. The Alpharetta illusion was shattered, but I still had to decide what to build in its place. 6 months have passed since the gavel fell in Judge Carter's courtroom. The relentless Georgia summer has finally broken, trading the suffocating humidity for the crisp, clean breeze of late autumn. I am standing on the wraparound porch of the Savannah waterfront estate. The sun has just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of violet and bruised orange. The air smells of salt marsh and blooming night jasmine. The house behind me is not silent. It is alive with the sound of genuine laughter, the clinking of heavy crystal glasses, and the warm hum of easy conversation. I am hosting a dinner party. But this is not a mandatory Sunday summons like the ones I endured for 3 decades in Alpharetta. No one is sitting near the kitchen doors just to clear the plates. No one is performing for seed money. This is a gathering of choice. Inside the dining room, Evelyn Reed is pouring a vintage red wine into the glasses of my guests. Without her sharp corporate blazers, she looks relaxed, sharing a story about her early days in finance. Silas Montgomery is sitting at the head of the long oak table, leaning back in his chair and laughing loudly at a joke told by Calvin Pierce. Calvin reinstated my position at the Georgia Historical Society the very morning the federal lawsuit became public record. He apologized profusely, and tonight he and several of my close colleagues are passing plates of roasted vegetables and fresh coastal seafood. I watch them through the restored stained glass doors. The doors Liam tried to smash with a sledgehammer are standing tall and unblemished. The people inside this house are my family now. They are the people who showed up when the walls were closing in, the people who believed my truth before it was validated by a federal judge. It is strange how quickly a kingdom can collapse when you remove the foundation of lies holding it together. For those of you wondering what happened to the Murphy family cartel, the federal justice system operates with a cold mechanical efficiency. Thomas Murphy did not take his case to trial. He knew the evidence we secured on the public record was too comprehensive to dispute. His own high-priced defense attorneys advised him that facing a jury with an audio confession from his wife and sworn testimony from his son would result in a maximum sentence. He signed a plea agreement for wire fraud and elder financial exploitation. My father traded his tailored suits and country club martinis for a standard-issue uniform at a low-security federal prison camp in Florida. His corporate board severed all ties with him the week the indictment was unsealed. His lucrative pension and his vast investment portfolios were frozen and subsequently liquidated to cover the bank restitution and the federal fines. He has years left on his sentence. The man who spent his entire life controlling everyone around him now has his meals, his movements, and his phone calls dictated by a prison warden. Liam learned a very harsh lesson about the conditional nature of unearned privilege. He discovered that loyalty in a marriage of convenience expires the very second the bank accounts run dry. Jessica packed her designer luggage and filed for divorce the same week the commercial lender placed the final liens on his assets. She did not look back. But the commercial debt was only the beginning of my brother's problems. Once the federal investigators mapped the money laundering network, the Internal Revenue Service initiated an aggressive audit of every shell company Liam had ever registered. They penalized him for years of unpaid corporate taxes and fraudulent deductions. Today, the former tech visionary does not wear expensive linen shirts or drive a pristine luxury vehicle. He rides a public bus to a regional call center where he works a customer service job. The federal government garnishes 70% of his hourly wages to pay back his tax debt. He lives paycheck to paycheck in a rented room entirely stripped of the golden armor our parents spent decades building for him. And then there is Patricia. My mother suffered a fate that in her eyes is far worse than a prison sentence. She suffered total social erasure. When the civil racketeering lawsuit hit the local news cycles, the affluent social circles of Alpharetta reacted with ruthless speed. The country club revoked her membership, citing a strict morality clause in their bylaws. The women who used to drink wine in her immaculate kitchen and help her spread rumors about my mental health stopped returning her phone calls. The bank foreclosed on the sprawling colonial mansion. My mother now lives in a tiny one-bedroom apartment situated above a dry cleaner in a forgotten working-class suburb. Her days of controlling the social narrative are over. She has no stage, no audience, and no status. She is a ghost in the very circles she used to rule. I do not call her. I do not check on her. The boundary I drew in the courtroom is permanent. I do not share these updates to gloat. There is no joy in watching the people who gave you life destroy their own. But there is a profound, unshakable peace in stepping out of the wreckage they created. The Beatrice Murphy Foundation is thriving. With the offshore trust fully secured, we purchased an abandoned 19th century library in Macon just last month. We are funding a full structural restoration, preserving the original architecture for future generations. The money my father tried to steal is now actively protecting history across the state of Georgia. My grandmother did not just outsmart her greedy son, she left a legacy that will outlast all of us. I step back out onto the porch and lean against the wooden railing, listening to the gentle flow of the Savannah River. I turn my attention to you, the people who have stayed with me through this entire journey. I spent 32 years of my life trying to earn a seat at a table that was built on deception. I used to think family meant sitting at that table even when the people serving the food were slipping poison onto your plate. I thought loyalty meant keeping your head down, accepting the breadcrumbs, and pretending you were full. I thought if I was just quiet enough, independent enough, and good enough, they would eventually see my value. They never did. Because you cannot prove your worth to people who benefit from keeping you small. If you are listening to this right now, and you are sitting at a table where you are constantly overlooked, undermined, or treated like an afterthought, I want you to hear me clearly. You do not owe your silence to people who disrespect you. You do not owe your loyalty to people who exploit you. And you certainly do not owe your sanity to the concept of biological family. If they will not make room for you, you do not shrink yourself to fit their narrow spaces. You stand up, you walk away, you build your own table. It might be quiet at first. It might be scary to leave the only dynamic you have ever known. But eventually, the right people will pull up a chair. The right people will bring warmth, honesty, and genuine laughter. You will look around one day and realize that the family you chose is infinitely stronger than the family you inherited. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, or if you know someone who needs permission to walk away from a toxic table, please share this with them. Leave a comment and tell me about the boundaries you have drawn in your own life. I read every single one. And if you are ready for another story, check the description below. I have a new one waiting for you. It is about a manipulative mother-in-law who thought she could steal a luxury wedding out from under her future daughter-in-law right up until the bride brought the receipts and canceled the catering. You do not want to miss how that reception ended. Take care of yourselves. Build your own tables. I will see you there. Looking out over the Savannah River tonight, listening to the laughter of the family, I finally understand the gift my grandmother really left me. It wasn't just this beautiful historic house, and it certainly wasn't the millions of dollars she brilliantly locked away in a charitable foundation. The real gift was the truth. If you take anything away from my journey, I hope it's these 3 lessons. First blood does not automatically equal family. I spent 32 years shrinking myself to fit at a dining table where I was served nothing but poison and expected to be grateful. You are entirely allowed to get up, walk away, and build your own table with people who actually value your presence. Second, never underestimate the power of documentation. My parents thought their wealth and loud voices could rewrite reality, but narcissists will always lose to cold, hard receipts. Whether it's a vintage red ledger or a saved voicemail, keep your records and let the truth be your armor. And finally, greed is a self-assembling trap. My father and brother were so blinded by their desperation to take what was mine that they eagerly swallowed a $2.5 million poison pill. You rarely have to destroy toxic people. If you establish firm boundaries and step out of their way, they will eventually destroy themselves. I'm Violet Murphy, and my archive of family secrets is officially closed. Thank you so much for being here with me. If my journey resonated with you, or if you are navigating your own toxic family dynamic, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share your own experiences in the comments below. You've been listening to PV Vengeance, and I can't wait to share the next incredible journey with you. Until then, keep your boundaries strong.